I'm here to introduce the members of the presentation, Constitutional Protections for Fake News. Kayla Shuretti is a junior at Franklin Pierce, majoring in political science and minoring in intelligence and security studies. James Colarusso is a senior at Franklin Pierce, studying history and philosophy. Rosalind Martin is a senior majoring in history and minoring in public history. Callie Picarello is a junior in the honors program, majoring in criminal justice and minoring in forensic psychology. Haley Sabetta is a senior majoring in criminal justice. Jonathan Spall is a senior studying criminal justice and political science. Macklin Lang is a senior English major. And Kristen Spencer is a senior history major. Thank you.
We were part of the 2017 fall semester constitutional law, where we created a case brief based on what we learned in our class. It surrounded the case of the Pizzagate. For those that don't know, it was during the 2016 presidential campaign where WikiLeaks released hacked emails of John Podesta, who was the chairman of Hillary Clinton's campaign. And a lot of conspiracy theorists claim that the emails contained coded messages referring to human trafficking, child pornography, and pedophilia ring, which operate in various restaurants in the United States. One of the restaurants that was affected was the Comet Ping Pong, a pizza shop in Washington, D.C. A man named Edgar Welch drove up to Washington, D.C. and fired off 2 shots from his assault rifle, claiming that the owner of the restaurant had to release the children in his basement, otherwise he would do what he needed to do in order to set them free. Since then, we created a legislation based on what our case is about.
So the hypothetical legislation that we came up with, we called it the Defending Dignity Act 2018. We said that fake news is defined as internet and social media sources that intentionally fabricate information, disseminate deceptive content, or grossly distort actual news reports in order to generate clicks, likes, shares, followers, and subscriptions to receive tangible benefits for the producer or purveyor. The test is to determine fake news would be whether the average person applying community standards asserts that the work depicts or describes damaging information about a person, place, or thing, and work then as a whole lacks credibility and has no redeeming literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. So the penalties that we defined were: convicted, penalties shall include, at minimum, story must be removed from site sources. The offender will be subject to losing media credential access for a minimum of 1 year. Monetary fine will be determined by the level of viewship and income derived from the story, and a jail sentence not to exceed 1 year. After a second offense, the previous penalties will apply, with the incarceration sentence did not exceed 5 years. In addition, the individual's internet capable equipment will be monitored, screen names, account names will be reported to an officer of the court, and the offender will be subject searches of said equipment at the discretion of the court for a time determined by the court. So the hypothetical case is called United States versus Jones 2020. The case facts are: Michael Jones was charged and convicted of twice violating the 2018 Federal Defending Dignity Act. The act is intended to deter the publication and dissemination of fake news. Jones was charged and convicted of violating this act after he published multiple stories on his website called Fact Wars that claimed that the Pizzagate story of 2015-2016 had expanded, and now political leaders Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Paul Ryan, and Mitch McConnell were either actively involved in a child sex ring or had known about it and covered it up to protect their congressional brethren and the Washington, D.C. business that were part of the ring. Jones was convicted in federal court and was sentenced to 6 months in jail, fined $50,000, and was ordered to have his internet usage, internet cable devices monitored for 1 month. Jones appealed his conviction on the grounds that the Defending Dignity Act was unconstitutional as a direct infringement on the rights of freedom of speech and press. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, in a divided vote, overturned the conviction and declared the act unconstitutional. The United States Supreme Court reviewed.
As defenders of this act, we will discuss its essence in relation to the case at hand. The purpose of this act is to rectify the relationship between the people and the media. The government has a compelling interest to do so, because a healthy relationship between the people and the media is a necessary component of a functioning democracy. Government regulation of fake news is necessary for such rectification because, as the case of Michael Jones reveals, There are indeed people who take actions that undermine the platform on which truth-based news may be dispersed and exchanged. The very platform that is necessary for the people to make the free, individual, well-informed, reasoned decisions required of a democratic populace. Therefore, the case of Michael Jones serves as a reminder of this act's necessity in rectifying the critically important relationship that exists between the people and the media. In short, this act, by regulating fake news as a narrow category of expression, works to resolve the problem of which we speak. By managing the impact that people like Michael Jones can have on the relationship between the people and the media, this legislation thereby fosters popular access to a stable platform on which truth-based news may be dispersed and exchanged. Furthermore, this act simultaneously upholds the constitutional rights of the people by avoiding unwarranted infringement on First Amendment rights. In other words, this legislation is designed to accomplish the desired effect of managing the problem of fake news in a constitutional manner. In turn, let us now examine in depth the three key pillars of our argument in turn: compelling government interest, clear and present danger, and the narrow definition of fake news.
So our client is being charged and convicted of twice violating the 2018 Defending Dignity Act. There are many violations to this of his First Amendment rights, of freedom of press and speech. The 2018 Defending Dignity Act is a form of prior restraint. The government is reviewing material where the publication is allowed, but with America's guaranteed right to freedom of press, his rights are being violated. In Neer v. Minnesota, the court found that a statute authorizing proceedings of information considered malicious, it is not consistent with the conception of liberty of press as historically conceived and guaranteed, and this was found unconstitutional. Not only this, but statements made with knowingly false facts are protected. There is no proof that Michael Jones made these statements with knowingly false facts. Statements should only be found livable if a public official can prove the falsehoods were published with knowledge of them being false. In the case New York Times Company versus Sullivan, there is a constitutional guarantee requiring a federal rule that prohibits a public official from recovering damages for a defamatory falsehood relating to his official conduct unless he proves the statement was made with actual malice. There is no proof that he used malice.
How does this case differ from any other accounts where something such as fake news happens away from the media?
How it implies compared to what? Can you restate the question?
How does this differ from any other time something such as this happens away from media's presence?
It differs because of the fact that we can see that there's a clear and present danger. The FBI had already stated that there was no sex ring, no child pornography, no nothing, but yet this guy Michael Jones went up and still deliberately not even threatened, almost deliberately could have hurt somebody. This is what we see as the clear and present danger threats compared to like the other cases, the New York Times and the Wisconsin case.
But there's also the statements were made without knowingly false facts about public officials, and those statements are protected. So in the example that I gave, New York Times Company versus Sullivan, it proves that statements made with these knowingly false facts are protected. So therefore, our client's statements should have been protected.
But he wasn't targeting a government official. If it was different, if he was targeting, like as the case says, official that was elected. This was a privately owned business and a private citizen.
But the statements that he made were also towards the people that were protecting the child sex ring. So those are public officials.
And you also said that the police said that there was no sex ring, but they didn't give us any proof as to showing that there was actually no sex ring or that there actually was no sex ring. So there was actually no proof in determining it true or false.
I think if we can't trust the FBI, then what can we trust?
I think we're overlooking the major problem at hand, which is that this presents a threat to the foundation of democracy in general. The overwhelming dissemination of fake news by distorting the truth, it impedes the discernibility of truth-based news. The indiscernibility of truth-based news, by preventing the populace from obtaining the information necessary to make the well-reasoned decisions that they need to make, it presents a threat to the foundation of democracy. Therefore, the overwhelming dissemination of fake news presents a threat to the foundation of democracy, and it needs to be addressed if we want to keep operating as a functioning democracy. And this legislation accomplishes that goal.
In our First Amendment rights, it says that we are, well, freedom of press and freedom of speech. So in the fake news definition, it states that the source receives tangible benefits. There are no tangible benefits that he receives, so therefore I don't think it can be considered fake news. Also, in the definition, it claims it intentionally fabricates information, disseminate deceptive content, or grossly distort actual news, but the news that my client presented has no proof of actually being false. So therefore, it shouldn't be considered fake news, and he should have his rights of being able to publish what he wants.
Well, there are
under
no
freedom of
grounds on which to stand to argue for its truth or validity. It was based on absolutely nothing. And the category of expression that's being targeted is extremely narrow, thereby not infringing upon First Amendment rights.
Well, you say that, but you also say that you want news to be real and factual, but there are a lot of news stations that are biased and conform their stories to fit their views, like Fox News does, and they fit it to be a Republican Party, to fit their needs and their viewers' needs. So would you not consider that fake news because they're not telling the whole truth? Just like our client may or may not be telling the whole truth based on what he knows.
The media's job is to spread the truth and keep us informed. Whether one side is a little more unbiased or biased towards one political party or the other doesn't necessarily mean it's fake, nor does it say that what they're saying is completely lies either.
So then the information that our client is spreading also could be true. We don't know that. It's not knowingly false or it's not knowingly true, so therefore he shouldn't be, it's violation of his First Amendment rights of freedom of press and freedom of speech. Also, the 2018 Defending Dignity Act, I think it's a form of prior restraint. This occurs when the government reviews material to determine publication that will be allowed. Americans are guaranteed the right of freedom of press, and the censorship is a violation of my client's First Amendment rights.
Whether it is not, we've already said it.
The definition of fake news as written refers to tangible benefits for the producer. Can you prove that this news was spread for personal gain?
I'm sorry, say that last part one more time.
Can you prove that Jones spread this fake news for personal gain?
The argument that can be made there is that he was trying to free the children, and he was trying to free the children because that apparently was going to make him feel good. So ultimately he was doing it for himself.
But even though what he was doing was for the better, that I feel like no person would not want to do, of freeing a child from a sex ring.
And she's asking, like, do you think our client is doing it for his own personal gain? And from what we know, that he was saying what he believed was true. He didn't do it for any benefits. He wasn't doing it for any money. He was just getting out to the people and his followers.
Without any knowingly false facts, which are protected.
But this kind of illuminates the very issue of fake news in general, doesn't it? I mean, if people can that easily be convinced of stuff that's not real and then go and take violent action on that behalf, I mean, that just further illuminates the fact that this is a threat to our democracy.
I think that would be in a bigger scope of another issue. The issue at hand is Michael Jones what he's being charged with is in violation of his First Amendment rights as an American citizen.
We stand by the argument that the category of expression that's being targeted is so narrow that that the regulation that's being placed by this legislation is warranted.
So how can you guys justify an entire section of our population being uneducated based on not getting valuable and informative information from the media to vote properly for topics that they don't believe in or that they think they know the full truth about?
Well, I think, like, as I was saying before, like, I think the fake news problem is more of a whole issue, and yes, I do agree that that's an issue, but the facts that we have in front of us, Michael Jones, there's plenty of cases there's proof that there was no malice. There's also proof, so for example, Hustler magazine versus Farewell, It compares a comparable case to the New York Times company versus New York Times versus Sullivan. In this case, a lead story in November 1983 issue of Hustler magazine featured a parody of an advertisement modeled from an actual ad campaign claiming that Falwell, a fundamentalist minister and political leader, had a drunken and centrist relationship with his mother in an outhouse. While Falwell has tried to sue for libel, because of emotional distress, the First Amendment freedom of speech protected extends to the making of patently offensive statements about public figures. So I think that kind of backs up about what our client is talking about in his fake news. Yes, I agree that fake news is an issue at hand, but this issue right here, our client there was no proof of knowingly false facts, so he made it out of what he believed was true, and there was nothing to prove that it wasn't true, and he was doing it out of trying to get children out of a sex ring, and I believe that what he did. So first, he didn't do it for any tangible benefits, which it states in the definition that fake news, there is no benefits he received, so I just don't believe that this should be considered fake news.
You bring up the word malice, and what about defamation of character? This pizza shop and the conjoining restaurants and the owners of the entire strip were threatened numerous times and were harassed and everything. Not only was that, I would say, not only malice, but careless to even think that how can a company thrive, or how can anyone even think of working in that little area? They're threatened 24/7.
But how could people want to work for an area that was holding a sex ring if that were
But we
to be
proved
true?
that the FBI had stated that there was no sex operation there.
There's no proof of that.
Yeah, you said they stated that they showed no proof
There's
of
no
it being
proof.
false.
Yeah.
There's no proof of it being true.
Well,
Exactly.
That's
It's
why
hard
it
to argue
shouldn't-
with the truth of something if it can't be argued for.
because it's not true or false. It's not fake news.
Well, I think, like, in this particular case, you know, Elefantis, the owner of the pizza shop, he received multiple death threats because of this case. And fake news ruins lives, you know? And it's like, how do we deal with that part of it, as far as you guys on the difference?
I agree with that, but as I was saying before, I think the issue at hand, like, the fake news is a bigger thing of an issue. Obviously, I agree that it is an issue and it shouldn't. I wish fake news wasn't a thing, but as for this right here that we're dealing with, I just believe that this is not fake news and it's a violation of his First Amendment rights.
And if you put a restriction on fake news, you're basically making the government control what people are allowed to say, and that is also restricting our First Amendment rights of freedom of speech and freedom of the press. So,
It's considered prior restraint.
But we already put some restraint on it, as the clear and present danger says. You can't yell fire in a movie theater. You can't yell certain things in schools. You can't yell certain things in places where, like, worship or there's a lot of crowd. This was literally trying to say that, what was his name? Michael Jones shot the pizza owner. What would happen then to
so
the
that would be
owner?
a totally different case. But what you're saying is
He
that
he found the information based on something that was completely false and liable.
It's not proved to be false, though.
But going back to what you said about people not being able to say fire in movie theaters or bomb on a plane and things like that, you're already putting restraint on what people are allowed to say on public. And if you give the government more leadway into controlling what people say, are we not going to be conforming to what they want us to think, what they want us to do?
Possibly, but if we can save one life or save one person, like I said, what happens if we literally know that he shot into 3 bullets into the air, but what happens if he had shot him instead?
Then we'd have a different case on our hands. But that's not what we're arguing. We're arguing First Amendment rights and our clients' rights.
Which are being violated.
So this is your client's second offense of fake news. Shouldn't he now know, based on the extremely narrow definition of what constitutes fake news, what he can and cannot publish?
Yes, but as I was saying before in the definition, so in the fake news definition, it states about the tangible benefits. He didn't get any clear tangible benefits whatsoever, and I believe that he did this out of basically trying to stop a child sex ring from happening. And also, like I was saying before, that it claims it intentionally fabricates information, disseminate deceptive content, or grossly distort actual news, but the news that my client presented has no proof of actually being false. And like I was saying earlier, statements made without knowingly false facts about public officials are protected.
You keep going back to the thing of tangible benefits. Let's just say that there was a sex ring, even though the FBI again said there was not.
No.
He would have been able to be labeled a hero. Isn't that beginning tangible benefits for himself?
If that's how the case ended, yes, but that's not how the case ended.
So he had the intention of getting some benefit, even if he did
Can't
not.
prove
Kn-
that.
We can. He literally went up, drove from South Carolina, that's over probably 3,000 miles from DC, to a pizza shop. He had a clear intent to make sure that he got some reward out of
You
this.
can't prove that. There's no proof that my client did that. There's proof that he could have done it out of his own benefit of goodwill, of just to be able to stop a child sex ring from happening if he believed it, because, as I said, there's no proof of knowingly false facts, and those are protected.
Well, there's also this major issue with distrust in the media, you know, having a well-educated public, and when people put out fake news like this, you know, they're not being educated on what is actually happening, and that's a huge issue surrounding fake news. I just don't understand how we're supposed to deal with that and better educate the public without having regulations like this.
Well, people should do more research on their own time. I mean, if everyone's going to believe what they see on the news, because a lot of news stories, when things happen, like when a major event happens at first, news coverage comes in really fast, and they might not know all the details, but they film it, and it's up to the people to kind of, you know, do their own research to kind of further their knowledge in what's happening. So you can't blame everything on just this one person, on his, you know, on his story, because people might not know all the facts. If they didn't choose to dig further into the story, then how is that on our client?
One of the big problems with the fake news is that it kind of discredits other sources as well, which makes it even harder for people to be able to discern the truth when they're trying.
I think we keep going back to the whole idea of fake news when we should be focused on Michael Jones right now. And yes, I do agree with what you guys are saying about how fake news is an issue. I agree with that. I'm not saying it's not. But right here, the case that we have in our hands, what proof that we have does not, it's proving that our client, what he has against him is a violation of his First Amendment rights.
No, I
Of
mean, with
freedom of press.
this case, more than anything else, it provides us with an opportunity to take steps towards rectifying this issue, an issue that's necessary for the foundation of our democracy. Insofar as this issue is not addressed, our democracy will not last.
So
And that's
you
a
want
serious issue.
so you want to put restraints on everyone's freedom of speech and freedom of press. Like you want to restrict
No,
that
and
for
that's
everyone.
why we're making it so narrow, so that it doesn't infringe on anything other than what we're targeting specifically.
Okay, then how would you suggest we do that then?
As we've laid out. I mean, and going back to the issue of discerning whether or not there's any basis for it, you know, whether it was factual or not, and what information he was working off of. I mean, there clearly wasn't any grounds for him to reach a reasonable decision. I mean, here, let me see this. So, what was it? It was found in emails that promoted the idea that his emails contained coded messages. There are no grounds to argue that there are coded messages in these emails. It was complete bull. I mean, this is dangerous stuff that we're talking about. If people are acting on this kind of information, not only shooting up places, I mean, it's going to threaten a lot of lives and threaten our ability to discern truth.
It will threaten a lot of lives, but what about the children that were involved in the sex ring if it was true?
But it wasn't true.
There's no proof that it wasn't.
There's no proof that we can prove. We can't prove it to be true.
And you can't prove it to be true or false, so it could have happened.
It's unreasonable to act on something if we can't prove it to be true.
But if you
If
can't
there are
prove
no
it to be
grounds
false
to act
either,
on something, then it's unreasonable to act on.
if you can't prove it to be false either, then why in the First Amendment rights, freedom of press and freedom of speech, why should someone's constitutional rights be infringed on just because they want to express something that they believe is true? Because like I'm saying before, you guys are correct in how there's no proof for it to be true, but there's also no proof of it to be false.
But the problem is the fact that he thought it was true.
Which creates the clear and present danger test, which we
Right.
established. You can't just assume that something is truthful when it's obviously not.
But that's basically an infringement on the First Amendment rights of freedom of press and freedom of speech. This is the 2018 Defending Dignity Act is prior restraint. The government shouldn't have to censor everything that goes out. Yes, I agree that some things should be censored, but this, coming from Michael Jones, is something that he believed to be true. No one knew that there's no proof that it could be false, so therefore he shouldn't be receiving the problems that he is.
I go back to the argument, we're saving lives as we clearly see that he drove up and shot up a place. If someone posts something out saying like, oh, you know, that there's a serial killer that's chopping off the heads of people, and it's fictional, and then someone drives up and tries to confront this thing or shoot someone else thinking that they are the criminal. We're trying to ensure that that doesn't happen.
But that would be a completely different case. That's not what we're dealing with.
You guys argue for the fundamentals of democracy by saying that their anti-fake news legislation affects the way that the general public perceives media, but doesn't your law that you're defending completely negate what the First Amendment says to be true?
We're just arguing that the facts that fake news distorts the truth, it distorts real news, as you want to call it, and ensures that fake news is not known about. If media can't be trusted, then how can there be a balance between democracy and the public?
Well, not everyone trusts what the media has to put out. Like I said, there's a lot of biased news sources out there, so some people might not watch news, and some people might not read the news, and some people might believe everything that's given to them based on what one station tells them. So not a lot of people expand their knowledge past what they believe to be true. So
But why do people have to do more research because the news is false? Like, why can't we just put out real news instead of fake news? Like, why does it have to go this far?
Well, there's no proof that the facts that he did state were false. But there's also no proof that they were true, so they could have been true or they could have been false. I agree with stuff that you're saying, with stuff that is knowingly false, that should not be put into the news in any way. But this case at hand that we have right here, there's no proof to say that what he's claiming is false.
And media doesn't always cover everything. Like, there's stuff that they keep out and stuff that they might not want people to know about. So, I mean, it's not just our case, but there are cases out there where news doesn't cover everything.
Closings?
Closing. Alright, well, we've definitely gone full circle. And in closing, you know, we just want to reinforce the fact that the government does indeed have a compelling interest to follow through and uphold this legislation. It's necessary for the foundation of democracy, and it covers a very narrow category of expression. Therefore, it'll take care of the problem that we need to take care of, and it's also constitutional. We stand by that argument in the end.
So, like I'm saying, I believe that this Defending Dignity Act is a form of prior restraint, and it is a violation against my client's First Amendment rights of freedom of press and freedom of speech. In the fake news definition, it states that the source receives tangible benefits. There is no tangible benefits that he received. It also claims it intentionally fabricates information or grossly distorts actual news, but the news that my client presented has no proof of it actually being false. Talking about that, and like I've said before, the New York Times Company versus Sullivan, Garrison versus Louisiana Hustler magazine, these are all cases that previously were dealt with that proves that statements made without knowingly false facts about public officials are protected. In each three of these cases were proven that showed that these statements, similar to what case that we're dealing with, all of those were proven that it is a violation of his First Amendment rights. And on top of it, the Defending Dignity Act being a prior restraint, it occurs when the government reviews material to determine publication will be allowed. Do we want that to be, that's infringing on Americans' violation of their amendment rights that are given in the Constitution, that are given to us as American citizens? Do we want to live in a world where the government censors everything we say? I agree that fake news is an issue, but here, this case at hand that we have, there is no proof that that information that my client stated is false.
Okay, so after hearing both closing statements, the Supreme Court here is going to deliberate for a couple minutes. We will hopefully come to a majority decision.
Okay, so our ruling is 3-1 in favor of, because there's no proof of actual malice or tangible benefits from the cited or the story published, with one dissent.
And I'm basically dissenting because I think fake news is such a pressing issue, and I've listened to both sides, and I think that just these cases, it's precedence, and I think just right now, like, we need to stand up for the Dignity Act.
I agree that Mike Jones had no proof of tangible benefits, and in the long run, with the definition of fake news, that's what determines.
And just to add on, I think that the issue of sincere belief versus actual malice was one of the key parts of this case. And I think that you guys did a good job in arguing that there was, he did believe what he was saying and there wasn't any actual malice when he published his story. Do you guys have any questions?
I hope you guys enjoyed our presentation.
I have a
Thank you
question.
guys so much. Oh,
What do you guys think about fake news now?
I mean, I think fake news is a bit of an issue, but it's also kind of hard to determine like what is fake news and how to stop fake news without constricting what people are allowed to say within the First Amendment, right? Like, yes, I do agree that we should do something about it, but it's also kind of hard to do something about it without fully trying to tell the people, oh, you can't say this because we think it's wrong, or like you can't do this because it doesn't look well on us for us on like the government to do this. Yeah.
In response to that question as well, you know, I do believe fake news is an issue, kind of playing a role here. I don't actually believe that it should be regulated. I believe that one of the things that we should be focusing on is further education, so that people are able to discern the truth for themselves.
The other issue adding on to that is that there's no clear definition either on what we can explain is what is considered fake news. That's a huge liability that we don't have, or luxury we can decide from.
When you were talking about the one case about yelling fire in a movie theater, and in the interest of public safety, the government does have the power to regulate your rights at any time. They're never guaranteed. So wouldn't you consider, as part of this case, him going to like shoot, like pretty much discharge a weapon at a scene? Isn't that in the interest of public safety to protect stuff like that from happening in the future?
well, I think that's why this case is different, because there was an action after Jones published the work, and I think because of that action is the reason why I dissented, because that is a public safety issue. And I believe that since someone physically went and did the action because of Jones's literature, whatever he published, I think that's why it needs to be regulated.
But at the same time, if you're thinking of like the whole scope, like I agree with you that obviously that shouldn't happen, but you can't stop people from doing the actions they do. Like you can try to stop it, but there's no stopping someone from having no idea what they're doing and going and shooting up a place. That's obviously a huge issue that we're dealing with now. But as for what Michael Jones said, like I believe that if statements are not proven to be knowingly false, that they should be able to publish whatever they want. If it leads to more seriousness, then that, like obviously that was serious, but if it leads to deaths, I believe that like something like that should be issued. But like Michael Jones posted this not knowing that it was false. He believed it to be true. So whether this guy went up and shot up the place, like it wasn't like that's not what he intended to have it happen.
Yeah, but the consequence of his action caused this to happen. So isn't he technically still responsible?
I mean, there's a lot of things that happen in today's world. There's like President Trump, there's a lot of things that he does, there's a lot of things that other people do that lead to those consequences. There's nothing we can do to stop it. Especially if we have constitutional rights of freedom of press and freedom of speech, we should be able to say what we want to say without proving harm, even though that person didn't harm anyone. I don't believe he should have done what he did, but
yeah, I got in here late, so maybe you already addressed this. in your legal arguments, but is fake news, I mean, that's what we call it now, but is that really a new development?
I don't think it's necessarily new. I think it's I think the word fake news is becoming more popular, but I think you've been dealing with this for years. I
Did
don't-
that come up in your legal arguments at all? Something parallels to fake news from earlier times and cases, or I was,
Yeah, we talked about cases that proved like Garrison versus Louisiana, Hustler magazine. I don't know if you've heard of those cases, but things like those, when they've proven that it proves that statements without knowingly false facts about public officials are protected.
In the narrow discussion of this case, you've made a number of references to the belief of whether it's true or not. But you also made multiple references to the difficulty in distinguishing true and false. And you've said a number of times that in this particular case, it's impossible.
Mm.
Is that unique to this case, or is that true for what we call fake news? And if that's the case, can we even have a phenomenon of fake news? Because fake assumes that it is not true. But if we can't prove truth, then is this whole discussion moot beyond the legal?
It's a fantastic
issue?
question. It's a fantastic
Practically,
question.
Is it even possible to have fake news if we can't distinguish truth from fiction?
I think that's a fantastic question. I personally think, I study philosophy myself, and I personally think that one of the most important things that we should be, one of the most important issues that we should be dealing with is how we go about discerning the truth. I think that's one of the things that we should be really focusing on in higher education. I mean, there's so much stuff out there, you know, whether it be news or whatever. And of course, we want to base our lives on, you know, truth. But in order to do that, we've got to be able to discern what truth is, as opposed to fiction. So.
But you suggested earlier that the answer to this issue is education. But to what are we educating? If there is no such thing as truth, how can we educate a discerning public to distinguish between truth and false?
Well, I think these conversations should be had in the school setting. I think that we should be talking about how we discern truth. What is truth?
Well, what is it for you guys? What is it? And how does that enable you to distinguish between real news, for lack of a better term, and fake news?
Proof. I think there just needs to be proof. If there's like I'm saying, if there's no knowingly false facts, I believe that anyone should be able to say what they feel. And obviously it's different if that leads to harm of a person or something like that. But like, as for cases that just people should be able to express what they want to say, that's in our constitutional rights of freedom of speech and freedom of press if they want to publish
But
it.
I'm not asking about freedom of speech issues. I'm asking about how do we define truth and how do we discern truth? How do we distinguish truth from falsehood?
I think that's a huge issue that we need to figure out what to do with. Because obviously it's causing harm in some places.
But wouldn't you guys agree that there are such things as empirical facts?
Well, yeah, correspondence theory of truth, sure, that's one method that we could use. Absolutely. Empiricism, yeah, totally. Also based on necessity, reason and logic. Logical necessity, that's one way of establishing truth. And then empirical verifying something empirically is another way of proving something. So those are two bases, logically and empirically.
Should you have used that argument in response to the other side with regard to whether it was truthful that in fact there was child abuse or whatever going on?
Yeah.
Would it have been a better argument than the FBI says so?
Yeah. Oh, totally. Absolutely.
Well, then to that point, I think you guys made the point that, you know, the FBI is the highest federal law enforcement agency in the land, has some empirical credibility, and their statements should be regarded at least as fact until proven otherwise.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, but like if someone says it's true without showing like proof of it being true, like can you really believe it though? You know, I'm just saying. But. Any other questions? No.
Thank you
for
guys.
coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.